Sandra Birchmore's life ended under deeply suspicious circumstances in February 2021. Her death, officially ruled suicide by hanging, raised numerous red flags and exposed a tangled web of police misconduct, corruption, and systematic cover-ups. The young woman's tragic demise, entangled in a series of abusive relationships with several police officers, opened up a larger discussion about the abuse of power within law enforcement in Norfolk County, Massachusetts. A vulnerable target. Sandra Birchmore was a 23-year-old woman described as vulnerable and troubled. She sought love and attention, particularly from male figures, as she lacked an active father figure in her life. This emotional void made her an easy target for manipulation and exploitation. One such male figure in her life was Matthew Farwell, a Stoughton police officer 17 years her senior. Farwell first met Sandra when she was just 13 years old through the Stoughton Police Department's Explorer program, designed for teens interested in law enforcement careers. The relationship between Sandra and Farwell, who was in his 30s, allegedly began as an inappropriate grooming interaction and continued for years, evolving into a sexual relationship when she turned 18. Sandra's involvement with Farwell wasn't the only problematic relationship in her life. Other police officers, including Farwell's twin brother William and fellow officer Brian Devine, were implicated in years-long patterns of inappropriate and abusive behavior toward her. These officers were all members of the Stoughton Police Department, and their collective actions blurred the lines between professional conduct and personal exploitation. The discovery and initial investigation. On February 4, 2021, Sandra Birchmore was found dead in her Canton apartment. She was discovered by a building manager after being reported missing by friends. Her death was immediately ruled a suicide by hanging. However, inconsistencies and evidence pointing toward foul play were ignored by local authorities. Sandra's family and friends strongly contested the suicide ruling. They described her as being excited about becoming a mother, expecting her first child with none other than Matthew Farwell, the officer she had been involved with for almost 8 years. Friends recounted that Sandra had spoken of an increasingly volatile relationship with Farwell in the months leading up to her death. She had told people that Farwell had grown angry over her pregnancy, even suggesting that she had hoped to trap him financially, expecting child support and demanding his involvement in the baby's life. Despite these troubling accounts, the investigation into Sandra's death was quickly closed, and no charges were filed. The Stoughton Police Department failed to thoroughly examine her relationships with Farwell and other officers, dismissing any allegations of foul play. A troubling pattern of misconduct. The internal investigation that followed Sandra's death revealed a series of deeply disturbing details. Evidence uncovered that Sandra had been groomed and sexually exploited by multiple members of the Stoughton Police Department, including the Farwell brothers and Brian Devine. These men used their authority and Sandra's emotional vulnerabilities to manipulate her into inappropriate and abusive relationships. An anonymous tip from one of Sandra's friends in January 2021 had attempted to alert the Stoughton Police Department about the nature of Sandra's relationship with Matthew Farwell. During a call to the department about a financial dispute, Sandra's friend revealed that Farwell was in a sexual relationship with Sandra. Instead of reporting this information, the officer who took the call relayed it directly to Farwell, who was his colleague. Farwell, in turn, instructed the officer to keep the information quiet, effectively preventing any investigation into his misconduct. This culture of silence and protection among law enforcement was pervasive. Officers who were aware of Farwell's behavior failed to report it, and some actively participated in covering up the misconduct. Despite multiple witnesses willing to speak to Sandra's emotional distress and the manipulation she endured, local authorities refused to pursue criminal charges. The district attorney's office claimed the case was too weak to pursue, despite the overwhelming evidence of misconduct and abuse. The public outcry and broader corruption. When the details of Sandra's case became public, the outrage in both Canton and Stoughton was palpable. The communities, separated by just a few miles, were shocked by the revelation that local law enforcement officers had been engaging in such unethical behavior for years without any repercussions. The case exposed a broader issue of police corruption that appeared to extend beyond Stoughton into other parts of Norfolk County. As more people came forward with their stories, it became evident that Sandra's exploitation was not an isolated incident. The local law enforcement system was rife with misconduct. and many believed that Sandra's case was part of a larger pattern of abuse that had been quietly tolerated for years. This included the case of Boston police officer John O'Keefe, who was found dead under suspicious circumstances just a year after Sandra's death. In that case, too, allegations of police corruption and cover-ups were rampant, with some protesting that the Canton Police Department had framed O'Keefe's girlfriend for his murder to protect other officers involved. A corrupt investigation. The same officers who had worked on Sandra's case also became involved in John O'Keefe's case, further fueling suspicions of a cover-up. Among these officers was a state trooper named Nick Guino, who had been tasked with extracting data from Matthew Farwell's personal and work phones following Sandra's death. Guino reported that no messages between Farwell and Sandra could be recovered from the phones. However, a federal expert later uncovered more than 32,000 text messages exchanged between the two in the year leading up to Sandra's death, highlighting a massive failure, or deliberate obstruction, by the local investigation. The failure to properly examine Farwell's phone data wasn't the only troubling aspect of the investigation. Sandra's friends told authorities that Farwell had grown increasingly violent with her as the pregnancy progressed. Just days before her death, he allegedly pushed her to the ground during an argument about the baby. On January 24, 2021, a week before her death, Sandra confided in a friend that Farwell had been acting strangely. She described how he had searched through her apartment, looking in her closet and bathroom for reasons she could not understand. On the night of Sandra's death, surveillance footage showed her accepting a food delivery at approximately 5:33 p.m. and later brushing snow off her car. She was last seen alive around 9:00 p.m. when Farwell entered her apartment. The footage showed him leaving the building 30 minutes later. At 9:43 p.m., Farwell told police that he had broken off his relationship with Sandra during this visit and that she was alive when he left. However, data from Sandra's iPhone showed that her last recorded movement was at 9:40 p.m., just minutes before Farwell left the building. The FBI steps in. As local authorities continued to stonewall the investigation, Sandra's family sought justice through other avenues. They filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the town of Stoughton, alleging that the police officers involved in Sandra's life had groomed her and were responsible for her death. In their lawsuit, they did not need to prove that Sandra had been murdered. They only needed to show that the officers' actions had led to her death. However, Sandra's family also did not accept the official ruling of suicide. They hired renowned forensic pathologist Dr. Michael Baden to review the original autopsy. Dr. Baden's findings were shocking. He concluded that Sandra had not died by hanging but had been strangled. He determined her death was a homicide, directly contradicting the state medical examiner's conclusions. The FBI took over the investigation following Dr. Baden's findings. 2 additional medical examiners were brought in to review the case independently, and both agreed with Dr. Baden's assessment. Sandra Birchmore had been murdered. Justice delayed but not denied. On August 28, 2024, after years of delay and cover-ups, Matthew Farwell was arrested by federal authorities and charged with the murder of Sandra Birchmore. He was indicted on 1 count of killing a witness or victim, a federal charge that is often used in organized crime cases. Federal prosecutors argued that Farwell had murdered Sandra to silence her about their relationship and her pregnancy. They contended that Farwell had staged Sandra's death to look like a suicide, relying on his knowledge of crime scene investigations to deceive his colleagues. He believed his position within law enforcement would protect him from scrutiny, but the persistence of Sandra's family, combined with the FBI's intervention, eventually brought the truth to light. As of the writing of this report, Matthew Farwell remains in custody, awaiting trial. If convicted, he faces the possibility of life in prison or the death penalty. Sandra Birchmore's family continues to fight for justice, not only for their daughter but for the many other victims of police misconduct who have suffered in silence. The tragic case of Sandra Birchmore serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power within law enforcement. It exposes the vulnerabilities of those who seek guidance and protection from the very individuals who exploit them, and underscores the importance of accountability and transparency in policing.